What's up, guys? Welcome back to the YouTube channel. I just left Coates Racing Engines, sporting one of his hats. He does all my machine work stuff. He got the block and he got the crankshaft done, so we are good to go. So did end up having to turn the crankshaft 2020. It was 1010 before, so we damaged it enough to where it needed to be turned again. So now the crankshaft on the rods and the mains are turned 20 thousandths, so that's not a big deal. He got us some bearings, so we're good there. The cap stuff did work. Number 4, which was the one I was having problems with, he redid that one, so he got it nice and square, ground it down, and line honed everything. Everything turned out perfect. So everything looks good. So I think we're going to be in good shape. Let me show you what we got. Don't forget to go to turbojohnracing.com, grab yourself a flip coin and some merchandise. I really appreciate it. We're going to get the bottom end back together today. Check it out. All right, guys. Well, you can see he got this thing all line honed up. This is nice and clean surfaces. So that thing looks great on the line hone. So the 3 middle caps was the ones that we had to fix. We had to weld it and get it so that it would go back together smoother. And this thing turned out nice. He did end up welding one of these caps over here. I think it was the number 4 one. He ended up welding it a little bit better, getting a little bit more material and getting it lined up better. And so everything turned out good though. I mean, so the the line hone worked out good. It's nice and clean. It looks like it cleared everywhere. The boring bar worked out pretty good. So there again, this is one of these high-end Bryant crankshafts that I didn't pay a lot of money for it. I don't have much in it at all, but he ended up turning it. The rod's in good shape, so we're good to go on the crankshaft. So that's what we're going to do today. The rods I brought over, y'all saw in the last video, I put the connecting rods on the pistons. So that is the goal today. These are all down in the box, just using king bearings for the mains and the rods. So these are the spacer bearings, and basically what you do is you take the 400 main bearings and then you just put a 350 in it. All they do, this is the thrust, they cut the thrust off of it completely, and then they just, it's gonna be hard to see it, I'll show y'all when I get it out. But what they do, oh, there you go. All they do is notch it so the 350 bearings will go and lay in that same spot. Now, last time I did this, last time I put the motor together, I used a Loctite to try to hold those bearings together. That kind of worked a little bit, but it didn't work great. When I pulled this motor apart, the Loctite had come loose. And so I don't think, that's probably the best solution. I think the problem was the whole time was these registers being loose. So now with the registers tight, hopefully everything's going to stay in place like it's supposed to. All right, well, let's get started. We'll go ahead and the only thing I'm going to do, I'm going to bury hone these cylinder bores real fast, and we're going to slide this thing back together. All right, guys, well, we got it honed out. Got some decent cross hatching down there. And oh, that's not a good example. Hold on, let me wipe the smudges off. It got some decent cross hatching. Man, that brake clean really messed it up. But we're just basically knocking the glaze off of it. All right, here you go. So we got the spacer bearings in. And you can see the way they go. I mean, they're very simple. They just snap right in. You got basically it's a 400 bearing and then a 350 bearing. It just snaps down on top of it. So it's just one of those things that's pretty good. Now, something else I always do is I modify the thrust bearing on the back here. So generally, this thrust bearing only gets oil from whatever is squashed out of here. So what we do is go in here and basically just a side grinder and then a file. And I just go a little notch on this side. And I also do it on the other side. And basically, so the oil, once it fills here, it gets a little bit of pressurized oil back to the thrust surface. And then that way when the motor's running, I mean, thrust bearings are pretty hard. There's a lot that can go. I've got a good video that talks about thrust bearing and what actually contributes to the wear. But so that's how you fix it. Rear main seal that I was talking about, make sure what we do is we offset it just a little bit of silicone on both, and then always put the big wiper back toward the crankshaft. And then that way it'll seal properly. All right, let's lube this thing up, clean the crankshaft real good, and then we're going to slide the crankshaft in the block. So we got this thing torqued down in there. It seems like all these bolts require a different torque. These I ended up torquing. I put a little bit more torque on all of them. The recommendation was 75 on these, 65 on these, 100, 65, and then 40. So what I did is I went up just a little bit so we could get a little bit more fastener strength on it, a little bit more strict. Hopefully it's going to be okay. I went up to 85 on these, 45 on the little teeny ones, 85, 75. I stayed at 100 for that one because that's a lot of torque, and that's a 1/2 inch stud, and then 75. And you know, the key thing is the way we set the thrust, the end play on this thing is, I don't know if you noticed, I had my pry bar, so I was prying it back and forth, and then I put pressure on it to pull the crankshaft forward in the motor, and then I tighten these down, and then that sets it. A lot of people, they'll hit it with a you know, like a dead blow hammer to push everything forward, but generally as long as you're rocking the crank back and forth, then usually you're set. And this thing has got some good thrust in it. I modified the thrust bearing, and you know, from my experience, you know, more thrust, 15 thousandths or so, even up to 20 thousandths is probably okay, and it's better than having it way too tight. There's a lot of people that completely disagree with that, but that's okay. But the key thing is you know, I use the Lucas for the assembly lube, and so the assembly lube is very, very, very sticky, and so this thing is pretty hard to turn. But the key thing is, and that's why I like the Lucas right there, is the Lucas just stays on the bearing. And I mean, this thing is hard to turn, but the key thing is it turns. I can grab it right here on the snout of the crankshaft, and I can turn it. Now, as we start putting together the motor with the pistons in it, once I start getting the drag of the rings, then this thing is not going to be the same. So I'm going to have to put a bolt in here so that I can actually turn this and assemble it. So that's what we got next. We're going to go ahead and stick the pistons in it. Is put the bearings in it. Now, one of the things that Richard had to do, the aluminum rods have that dowel in it, so the crank is turned 20, so he could not get the dowels in the bearings. So he has a fixture for drilling the bearings, so he drilled the bearings. So we're going to assemble those. What I'll do first is I'll go ahead and get all the bearings on every one of the rods, and then that way it'll be easier to put in. Something else that is interesting, see down there on the floor, I got some 50 weight oil. These are going to be torqued. These L19 bolts are going to be torqued down to 90 foot-pounds with 50 weight oil instead of ARP, like Ultra Lube. All right, so we got the motor turned up over on the side here. So what I'm going to do is, there's a couple ways to do it. You can turn the motor up, you know, to where it's normal, and then just turn the crank and then install back and forth. Or you can go down one side and then, you know, tighten them up. That's what I prefer to do. So this is cylinder number 1. So I'm gonna go number 1, 3, 5, 7. And you can see over here I got the bearings all in the caps. So these are good to go. So these are ready to go. So I'm gonna grab number 1. I'm gonna slide it over there, and we're gonna stick them all in. And hopefully we don't mess any rings up. I don't have, for my bore, one of these things. This is an adjustable one, and you know, it kind of works, but I don't really have very good luck with it. So I'm gonna use the old school, just a regular spring compressor here, and this thing works great. I mean, the only thing with this, you just have to make sure that this is down on the bottom, and then just lightly tap it down, and usually it'll pop right through. The other thing you have to be careful of, sometimes these O-rings will get in the way, and I think that's probably my problem with using the great big one, is the O-ring just kind of pops it up enough to where it doesn't get all the way down in there. So you just have to be careful. You don't want to break any rings, especially since rings are not available for this at the moment. So that would be a problem. So we're going to gently push it down on there, and then hopefully they all go in, no problem. Let's try. Half of the motor is done, and so one of the things to look at, so we went ahead and torqued all these down. You know, you always want to spin it over to make sure everything's good. But so these rods are the forward offset, and they're just barely offset. But if you look down in there, It is a little close to the piston, but it's not close enough to be a problem. But it's not quite directly in the middle. If I would have been able to get a dead centered connecting rod, then it would have been moved over about 20 thousandths that way. And you can, if you look on the side of the rod, so you got the little bit of a dimple, and it's just offset just ever so slightly. But that's not going to be a problem. So, but spinning this thing over, it spins over good. Always want to make sure that it spins good. The flat part of the rod is going to be against the flat part of the other rod. Feeling exciting. All right, we're halfway done. Let's stick the other ones in real quick, and then we'll be done with the bottom end. We'll have a complete assembled bottom end. All right, guys, well, here we go. We have an assembled short block. So all the pistons are in it. Next time, we're going to get the oil pan on it, get the camshaft in it, and maybe get the heads on it. We'll have a together motor here soon. All right, guys, make sure y'all comment, like, and subscribe. Please go to turbojohnracing.com to pick you up some swag. Later, guys.